Hello, I'm Chuck Benoit. Welcome to Restoring Our American Republic. So it's done. America rededicated to the God of our founding. So what does that mean? Well, to the average citizen, possibly nothing. But the God of the Bible is such a kind God that the least attempt to reach out to him is taken very seriously by him. For instance, in the Old Testament, there was a king, Hezekiah, who beseeched the Lord on his deathbed, and God granted him another 15 years of life. And also in the Old Testament, King Manasseh, who was one of the most wicked, if not the most wicked king in Israel. And he was defeated by the king of Assyria and taken prisoner to Babylon. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 33, we hear of his repentance and the kindness of the Lord in granting his request. And then, of course, there's the thief on the cross who simply says, "Remember me when you enter your kingdom," and he was immediately brought into the kingdom of God. Now, America has not been perfect throughout its existence, but it would be difficult to say that we have not been one of the most generous nations in the history of the world. We've been in a spiritual decline, possibly for the last 75 of our 250-year history. But this rededication, I believe, will be a precursor for a great move of God's Holy Spirit on this land and the beginning of what President Trump calls our golden age. We will not only be more prosperous, but the gospel of the grace of God will be more free to impact the nations which the Father has given to Jesus as his inheritance. So with that, good morning, Mike Levine.
Good morning, Chuck.
How are you this morning?
Lead in
to
today's discussion.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I just feel it was a big deal. I really do feel it was a big deal spiritually. But what you say, what is written comes to pass. Well, what happens in the spirit eventually is manifest. So that's my opinion.
Well, the Spirit wrote the Bible, Chuck.
There you go.
Somebody, I tell you, I was speaking at a coalition of center-right over in Orlando one day, and there was about 75 political organization leaders in the room, which of course, when you have that many political leaders in the room, you get a little smattering of pastors in there, right? Maybe 5 pastors were in the room. And I stood in front of those people and I said, even God wrote it down.
There you go.
And they were aghast when I said that. And of course, you know me, Chuck, right? I mean, my original reaction is always to be liked and to be accommodating and everything, but it doesn't take me long to snap out of it.
No, I guess not, Mike. I do
So
recall.
I'm standing in front of the room, Chuck. I'm standing in front of the room. There's a U-shaped seating arrangement. So I'm standing in the front of a U-shape, right? And of course, I love to do this because it just kind of comes over me when I get myself in trouble when I'm publicly speaking. And my response to that is, let's just make eye contact with every single person in the room and figure out where I'm really at. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Because there's so much that can be derived from nonverbal communication, right? So that's what I do, right? They go, oh, Mike Levine just said that even God wrote it down, which he did.
He did, yeah.
So then I go around the room to find out how much trouble I'm actually in, right? And I give them that pregnant pause for them to go through the same process that I'm going through. Wait a second, what did this guy just say? And then I responded after I gave them the pregnant pause to deal with their emotions, right? And then I said, well, he did write it down, didn't he? To make them answer the question with a nice yes or no. And then we moved on.
There I go. All right, okay.
It was quite great, yeah. So again, I would say to you that definitely, Chuck, I mean, honestly, when you look at the Bible, Chuck, the entire Bible is written by prophets who were spiritually anointed. Can you agree with that?
Yeah, I can. And when you talk about, I think there's about 40 of them over the span of a huge amount of time. you might find it very difficult for any kind of attempt to try to make things fit, kind of thing. Everybody was on their own, and they had their own particular manner of doing things, and yet it all fits. It all works. So.
Sure. So Chuck, what is inspiring Raul Castro today?
Yeah. Well, before we get into that, I just want to note, because we were trying to do a remote broadcast Tuesday. Didn't work. Sorry about that for anyone who was kind of expecting us to be on. We missed it. Several different things turned up. It was our first attempt to do a remote broadcast. Maybe not our last, but maybe our last. So yeah, Raul Castro. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So what is going on regarding Cuba? We have this indictment here for Raul and a few other people. Sounds similar to Venezuela a little bit, don't you think?
I think there are many parallels.
Many parallels. And of course, I would think that our buddy Raul knows that he could very well be snatched up in the middle of the night at some point in the not too distant future, unless, of course, he may possibly want to make a deal. Who knows?
Sign over the deed to the island?
Yeah, something like that.
That's a good starting point.
There you go. There you go.
To open the negotiation. Yeah, that's no problem. But keep in mind, Chuck, Castro's 94 years old.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what are we really dealing with here?
Yeah,
right?
Well, probably not necessarily just him. But let's go ahead and kind of start at the beginning, because, all this is regarding the shooting down of a couple of little Cessna planes that belong to the Brothers to the Rescue, an American activist nonprofit organization that was based in Miami, and it was formed by Cuban exiles. And the point is that they were in opposition to the Cuban government and made several efforts to help people escape from Cuba after Castro's rise to power. We're going all the way back into the 1980s, where about 100,000 Cubans had immigrated to the United States during this time. It was just a huge mass of people leaving. So that's kind of who they are. Do you want to add anything to that, Mike?
Let's see here, Chuck. Where do you want to get started here? So I don't know how you start in the beginning, right? This thing really is about the end because this is, as we pointed out, by identifying the similarities to what's going on in Venezuela, right? So anyway, what I'd like to talk about, Chuck, is just the parallels about what's going on here. The Castros have ruled Cuba with an iron hand since they won the island in a revolution, which you would have thought at the time was for freedom of the nation of Cuba. But in reality, it turned out to be a iron-fisted, communistic, autocratic regime. So, that is very interesting what people do when they actually attain power. So that's what's going on there. Obviously, you get into this whole thing with Cuba's relationship with Venezuela, which also ties them to China and Russia and Iran. And then you factor in the point that we've had this relationship with Cuba for 50 years, and they're 90 miles off the coast of Miami, and war fighting is no longer done with boots on the ground, and they could fly drones over Florida within minutes. And then you take into the fact, everybody needs to realize that Russia maintained military installations in Cuba, although those military installations have not really been upgraded and maintained since the 1960s, so they are a bit antiquated. But when Russia got into the whole thing with Ukraine, Russia assigned their rights to those military bases to China.
Yep.
And that means that you could have a hypersonic missile in Cuba that could strike Miami in seconds. So that is the danger of where we're at by allowing Cuba to continue to be an adversary of the United States 90 miles off of the coast of the state of Florida, Chuck. So that is a real threat to our national security and goes to the strategy, which is what we're talking about here. We're talking about a strategy as to how we can eliminate the threat of Cuba being an adversarial nation. And the strategy is very identical, really, to what the Trump administration did with Nicolas Maduro. And the strategy is to indict him so we can go get him. And that's what we're seeing here, Chuck.
Sure, there you go. So just briefly, what basically happened was that that we have on a recording Raul Castro giving the command to shoot down a couple of little Cessna planes, which is against international law. Even if they were in Cuban airspace, it's still illegal to shoot down a plane that's not a military plane. There are several different things that they're supposed to do to escort that plane back out of their airspace. But by the time they get around to shooting, the Cessnas were about 10 miles out of Cuban airspace. So that, again, is very much a violation of international law. And my question is, why wasn't anything done 30 years ago?
That's a great question. So I have the indictment right here, Chuck. Just so you know, ladies and gentlemen, if you're going to make an argument, bring the source document. That's what we're talking about. We can all have our opinions. And I'm telling you, politically, for my grassroots friends and supporters, I say supporters, but people who listen, who are exposed to my opinions, this is what my opinion is based on. Okay. So we also have to do that. Our opinions don't really carry a lot of weight until they're tied to actual source documents so that we know exactly what is being done. So this is the indictment right here, which goes through the charges for the various people who are being charged, including Raul Castro, of destroying airplanes, murdering Americans. And then again, this document doesn't say that the airplanes ever went into Cuban airspace. It says that that these airplanes were shot out of the sky with no warning whatsoever. Chuck.
Yes, and I agree with that, Mike. One of the things that I was reading said that they may possibly have entered Cuban airspace, but
may possibly
have. That's right.
But there is no record.
10 miles
in the indictment. There's no record to that effect.
Right. So still 10 miles outside of Cuban airspace is a lot of distance. They should have been pretty obvious, and the intent was to take. Again, the recordings that we got. I guess we didn't have them at the time, but it was a clear determination by Raul Castro himself saying, "Shoot these guys down." And I think you had some backstory on some spies that were sent in from Cuba to Miami. Why don't you tell us about that? You were giving me some background before we got on the air.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, you got freedom fighters took over the island of Cuba, and then because of their access to foreign countries and the benefits to them personally of aligning with other foreign countries, they quickly became authoritarians and began ruling the island with an iron hand. Um, and of course, you know, many Cuban families, assets were taken away from them, their homes, their businesses, just like my friend Warner Jimenez, who was a mayor of a city in Venezuela. They have seized his hotel. They seized his offices, businesses, and he came to Florida as an asylum. So the same basic thing is going on in Cuba prior to Venezuela, obviously. But so now, of course, you have this authoritarian regime, and the people in Cuba are not happy because nobody likes to live under authoritarianism except the authoritarian themselves. So people start finding out, well, what are we going to do about this? Can we militarily take these guys on? Can we? Oh, and then many Cubans decided, you know what? This is a fight we can't win. So we're just going to start migrating to Florida. And you can go on to the whole story about the many methods by which Cubans have defected to the state of Florida. And of course, as these families are all going through similar experiences, what do? They, like humans always do, we band together on a common cause. And we say, you know what, we're going to help people get out of Cuba. So that's when this organization was put together. And these guys had some resources. The Cuban people are incredibly resourceful. So they, put together enough money to buy these airplanes and stuff, and they started putting coalition groups together in Florida. And of course, there's also pro-democracy organizations under the radar organizing in Cuba, and these organizations between Florida and Cuba are communicating with each other. So, basically, this organization that was assisting pro-democracy Cubans on the island to defect or to overthrow the government, they would fly over the island in these Cessna airplanes and drop leaflets. And this is all in the indictment, Chuck. Anybody, and if you want a copy of the indictment, email Chuck or me, or put a post in the comments, and we'll send you the indictment. But I found it online pretty easy. But so now, of course, this organization dropping leaflets over the island of Cuba, that was pretty annoying to the regime. So the regime starts saying, okay, well, who are these people? Now they send these military spies into South Florida, and the spies align themselves with the organization, and actually they infiltrate these organizations, and they're pilots. So they start flying these missions that are pro-democracy missions into Cuba to, earn the trust of the organizations over here in the state of Florida. And of course, they're taking the directions from the Castro regime the entire time, Chuck. So that is how now the Castro regime has direct intel on what the pro-democracy Cuban organizations in Florida are doing, and they retaliate against them. They start shutting down these pro-democracy rallies in Cuba and do other things. But my point is, Chuck, that these organizations in Florida become very annoying to the Castro regime over many years, Chuck. And I'll turn this back over to you for some comment.
Yeah, so the end result is that they had a little more information in Cuba than we would have liked, I guess, and they
a lot more. They had all the information.
All the information on her. So looking back, President Clinton was president at the time, and he did denounce the downing of the two planes, but his response was sanctions. And there were no criminal charges against, at the time, Raul Castro. So sanctions, that was pretty much it. What do you think President Trump's plans are for Cuba?
But let's just go back to that for a second, Chuck, because I know you were concerned about it earlier. But let's face it. Well, I mean, Donald Trump is a game changer, 100% game changer. So when you go back and look at what was Bill Clinton thinking at the time, well, Bill Clinton was dealing with Russia. Bill Clinton, again, all of our, God, Levine, you're going to get in so much trouble. But let's face it, compared to Donald Trump, all of our presidents have been, I'm going to use the kind word, passive. all of our presidents before Donald Trump were passive. And this is a life lesson that I'm learning. I wish I would have learned this lesson much earlier in my life, but passivity gets you nowhere. Okay. And that's what we're doing here. So obviously, Clinton, if he would have gone and extracted, of course, keep in mind, Kennedy with the Bay of Pigs and all that stuff in the 60s, and Bill Clinton is saying, well, I don't want to experience repeat of that. So he takes it. And of course, the more you allow people to abuse you, the more abuse you get. So that's what the story on Clinton. And then, of course, Donald Trump just comes in and says, hey, you know what? Donald Trump believes that the United States military is the most powerful military in the world, and there is no other military that can stand up to it. And I could make that point all day long. We could do a totally another episode just on the strength of the American military. But Donald Trump knows about the tools and resources that he has at his disposal when Bill Clinton wasn't so confident that the American military could stand up against Russia, China being much less of a threat at the time. So that's what Clinton was thinking, but Trump obviously doesn't see that the same way at all. And that's when you get, like, for example, why did Russia go into Ukraine? It's because Joe Biden was I'm going to be kind again and use the word passive, but certainly Vladimir Putin knew that Joe Biden was not going to resist his invasion of Ukraine. And Bill Clinton was not willing to defend American rights and sovereignty against that little island of Cuba because he feared the alliance that Cuba had with Russia, let's just say. So this Donald Trump is the first president that actually is willing to utilize the resources in his arsenal in order to put America first, Chuck.
Yeah, I go along with that. And we're glad that it's President Trump who's involved with this. But I think Trump said this is taking Cuba in some form, whether I free it or just take it, I think I could do anything I want with it if you want to know the truth. I think that's a quote from President Trump. So he's possibly hasn't made up his mind yet as to what it is he wants to do with it. But and of course, taking it or not taking it is one thing. But if we were to take it, what would we do with it?
We would make it a resort. We'd put a big Trump Tower right in the middle of it on the beach, right?
Change the name Cuba to Trump, right?
But let's get serious again, Chuck.
Okay,
I'm telling you,
I'm happy with
that in 2023, I had recently filed to run for the Florida House, and of course, everybody was in a big uproar about that. Again, we can get into the tactics of American and Floridian politicians on retaining power. We can have that conversation. But so long story short, Senator Dennis Baxley at the time was not, he didn't like the way that I came onto the scene. He thought, Dennis Baxley told me, that people should only run for public office if they're asked to run. And of course, what Dennis Baxley doesn't understand is I was asked to run, but I just wasn't asked by his people. So with credit to Dennis Baxley, he invited me to come up and spend some time with him in Tallahassee, which of course I did. So I'm sitting in Dennis Baxley's office and we're talking about Florida politics and the state of the state and various things going on. But at that particular time is when basically Russia had just gone into Ukraine and assigned those military bases to China. So he and I were talking about the importance of that transition and the threat to not only the state of Florida, but to America of having China in charge of military bases in Cuba, 90 miles off of our coast, with hypersonic ballistic missile capability. And then while I was in the senator's office, there was a very high level senatorial meeting made up of, I believe, 8 senators, which was by invitation only, to address this exact threat So Senator Baxley knew at the time that I was one of the only politicians in Florida who was talking about the threat of China against the state of Florida and the importance, which was in my campaign platform, that Florida should have an iron dome similar to Israel's Iron Dome to protect us because we are a peninsula sticking out, jutting off of the continental mainland of the state of Florida that needs protection from missiles that could possibly be launched from as close as Cuba, Chuck. What do you think about that?
Yeah, Mike, you seem to be oftentimes a little bit ahead of the curve, and that's probably what gets you in trouble. People haven't figured out what it is they're supposed to be talking about, and you're coming up with solutions. Yeah, so I think it's important maybe to note that right now they don't have hyperballistic missiles available, but they could have with China taking control. I mean, that's something that's could be futuristic, but my guess is.
Okay, Chuck.
Yeah.
The reason that China didn't move hypersonic ballistic missiles onto the island of Cuba is because the United States told them that that was not a good idea.
Yeah.
They would have done it
I agree
had
with.
we not. And you have not heard that in the news. Nobody has talked about that at all since that happened. But I know for a fact that that did in fact happen, and China fully intended to put hypersonic ballistic missiles on the island of Cuba within seconds of striking South Florida, Chuck. That's how serious this threat is. Okay? But I tell you something, Chuck, for the audience. This is the only reason I do this, ladies and gentlemen. You know, we live in the United States of America, and of course, what we're seeing around the world is opening everyone's eyes, and thank God for that. Okay, but we are living in a very tumultuous time. This whole thing in Iran is a major deal. All the players are involved, and Cuba is a major card in this negotiation. Okay, so Cuba cannot remain a proxy of Russia and China. That is not acceptable to our interests here in the United States, and particularly here in Florida, Chuck.
Yeah. So with our final few minutes, what would we do with Cuba? Do you think we should take it over? Just demand regime change? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I tell you something, Chuck. With my background and political experience, I have had the blessing of knowing a lot of really smart people. And one lesson that I learned when I was working for Florida Realtors is that all vacuums get filled. Key concept: all vacuums get filled. So basically, because Cuba was effectively a vacuum, it got filled by the interest of Russia, and then by extension China, and then of course Venezuela, who provided all of the oil energy resources to Cuba for free until Trump snatched Maduro out of Venezuela. So the point is, it doesn't really matter what we do with Cuba as long as we fill the vacuum and we don't allow someone else to do something with it. But if, like, for example, Marco Rubio a day or two ago just put out a message to the Cuban people in Spanish, of course, telling them that freedom, liberty, entrepreneurialism, capitalism is available to them under the United States protection. So that's what's going to happen, Chuck. The United States is going to, I would suggest we should make it a territory, and then we should deliver we should invest in capitalism in Cuba. Cuba is a rich entrepreneurial environment, Chuck, and that's what's going to happen in Cuba. The Cuban people are going to be freed. The Cuban people are going to be empowered, and then the love affair between Florida and Cuba and the United States eventually in Cuba, because we will turn Cuba into a cash cow, because I mean, honestly, just from a tourism standpoint, and let's tell the audience as well, Chuck, that I went to Havana, Cuba 15 years ago. I was vacationing in Mexico, and learned that I could take a little puddle jumper flight over to Cuba. And I was there for 3 weeks. So I took out a few days and I actually did that. So I've walked the streets of Havana. I know what a disaster Cuba is, and it is a disaster. I wanted to come home immediately when I put my feet on the ground there. You could feel it. It was horrible. And all of my intuition, all of my emotional reaction was confirmed when I walked the streets of Cuba, of Havana, with local Cubans guiding me personally. Okay, now we can have that conversation sometime. But giving capitalism and entrepreneurialism to the Cuban people you will find that Cuba will turn into a little paradise relatively quickly, Chuck.
That would be my guess. We are out of town, Mike. Why don't you just give us a final comment?
Well, the sad part about it is Puerto Rico, right? I mean, why does Puerto Rico not? Puerto Rico has all the potential of Cuba. So why is Puerto Rico what it is? And we have to be fearful and not fearful. We never want to be fearful. Fear is the worst enemy that we have. But, we have to acknowledge and recognize that this won't happen by itself. So, for example, I wish the best for the people of Puerto Rico and people living on the island of Puerto Rico. Why are there so many Puerto Ricans in Florida? And it's because they have no economic opportunity on the island of Puerto Rico. So, we really need to take a look at this, and we need to have some capitalism injected into these markets, and we need to release the people of not only Cuba, but Puerto Rico also, of the burdens of heavy-handed government in those. We're talking about Cuba today, which is definitely true under a communistic regime. But I want the same thing for the people of Puerto Rico. I want them to have economic opportunity. I want their taxes and budgets to be well managed. I want their entitlement programs to be well managed, and that's what's going on. But I believe, Chuck, that under American leadership with a Trumpian agenda for Cuba, Cuba can quickly become a little micro paradise, Chuck.
Well, thank you for that, Mike Levine, and thank you all again for tuning into our twice weekly live stream. Please follow us on Facebook and X at RestoreOurRep76, or check us out on YouTube at Restoring Our American Republic ROAR. Please like and share the program. And remember, if you're unwilling to govern yourself, you will be governed by tyrants. Until next time, God bless you, God bless President Donald J. Trump, and God bless America.